Hey guys, welcome to this special edition of It's You, Oh Fuck, It's Me in session with a psychotherapist. Today is a pretty significant day for me. I am 25 years clean and sober. So this time in 2001, I would have been on my way to rehab or on my way to a detox. And I think I shared a bit about this on my last podcast, so I don't want to bore everyone to tears with that. But also felt for me like there's a bit of accountability in sharing this. My partner Sophie, or my fiance today, asked me what are some highlights and what are some things that you wish you could tell your younger self. And it's a hard question because I think a lot of the time it's what we go through that makes us us. So would I change anything? I don't know. I've been reflecting a lot today. I went to work, I got to hang out with some amazing clients. That definitely wouldn't have been possible without all these years of recovery. And what is it? What does it mean to be recovered? There's a lot of people out there who I would think are abstinent from alcohol and drugs, but to me, there's a big difference between being abstinent and also being recovered or recovering. And even in the world of AA, or NA or GA or whatever A we're talking about, whatever 12-step program, there's also a lot of people who think that just putting down the alcohol, the drugs, or the poker machine or whatever it is enough. And it's not enough. I truly believe I've got a spiritual problem. And I knew that from very young. I was somebody who had, imaginary friends and all these sorts of crazy things that a lot of kids never really had that I had. And I felt like I was always a bit different. And I was fucking different, very different. And I guess for me, the more different I was, the less I felt like I fit in. And the more, as soon as I found alcohol, the more I needed that substance to make me feel like I was okay to fit in. And I suppose what I've learned in the last 25 years is how do I fit in as to the best of my ability? How do I fit in the world without needing alcohol and drugs? I'm still a bit different. I've written a book in the last few months that clearly shows how different I am. And that, yeah, that book was written for me, like I said many times throughout the book. And I've also said on this podcast that it was almost more of a journal than it was a book. And I suppose what would I change and what are the highlights and the lowlights? I don't know. I've got two amazing daughters. I've got an amazing fiance now. I live in an amazing place in Australia on the south coast here. Do, I wouldn't change the job that I do. I wouldn't change the clients that I have. Does it come with its challenges? 100%. Life comes with its challenges. But the other option for me is that I forget that I'm an alcoholic and I forget that I'm an addict and I try social drinking again. I've got too much to lose. That's the thing for me. Why do I stay sober? Why do I do what I do? Because I've got too much to lose. And I see how strong that black wolf in us is, that egocentricity. This egocentricity gets formed fairly young. When we're born, we're connected. We're almost having a spiritual experience. The thinking and the feeling are connected. And as we start to form and as we start to experience life, that thinking and that feeling get disconnected. And I know for a fact I'm a feeling function dominant person. I always have been. And we live in a world full of thinking function dominant people. And that can be an issue. Carl Jung talked a lot about this 100 years ago. A lot smarter man than I am, a lot more wise than I am. He dedicated his whole life to this journey. And he talked about the psyche being cut into four quadrants of thinking and feeling and perceiving and intuition. And I think we live in a world now, and it's even worse. I was born in 1978. It's even worse now for these kids where if you're not in your thinking function, you almost become redundant in the world. Everything's geared around this thinking function. So a lot of artists, a lot of left hemisphere dominant people rule the world. And the problem we've got is that right hemisphere is just getting left behind. So for me, I'd like to work with more people. I'd like to do this more. I want to keep on my journey. I'll read anything and everything. And, there's so much wisdom everywhere. And what I want to leave to people today is there's no right or wrong way to do this journey. What we need is we need something that will reconnect ourselves to ourselves. And I think that's what the 12 steps does. It gives us an understanding of who we really are underneath all that. Like I shared a little bit about in my previous podcast, the last one about Easter, where I shared about, the Japanese almost repairing vases and broken things with gold, because to show the significance of we're not broken. We're actually we're all in need of repair. It's the cracks is where the light comes in. It's the crack, it's the brokenness that when it forms back together is the magic. And every spiritual teaching and every religious teaching, every religion has always talked about this, that things like why do we see the splinter in the other person's eye when we miss the log in our own? Because it's so easy to point the finger and have a look at what you're not doing or what you're doing. And I suppose for me, it's always come back to what I'm doing. How do I stay sober on a daily basis? I pray, I meditate, I try and do a good deed. I try and look after people. I try and give back a bit to the world rather than taking from it, because by nature, I'm a selfish person. I know it. I'm so fucking selfish. And that was my biggest problem. And even now I can still be selfish. There's probably people out there thinking, if they're listening to this, thinking, you're still selfish, Chad. And I probably am. But I know I'm on this journey, and I think I have the ability to look at myself now. So for anyone out there, if you're struggling with anything, you can use these 12 steps. There's so much information out there on self-evolving or self-evolution, self-awareness. And how do we become more aware? Because Socrates said, an unexamined life is a life not worth living. I'm not sure he's the only person that said that, and I'm not sure if he said it exactly, but I know that there's this inability for us to look at ourselves. It's always Trump's fault, or the government's fault, or my partner's fault, or my mum's fault, or my sister's fault, or my uncle's fault, or it doesn't really matter, my kid's fault. The other team's fucking football's fault, the referee's fault, doesn't really matter what it is. There's always a reason why it isn't us. And I think for me, at such a young age, I was forced to see that actually, Chad, it is you. It is your fault. It's not actually my fault I'm an alcoholic, but it's my fault my life got to where I was. And once I learned that there was a way around that and that I could actually stay sober on a daily basis, if I just didn't have the first drink, that was like fucking groundbreaking for me. That if you don't have the first drink, you can't get drunk. Like, it's so simple, but not so simple. So I just wanted to do a quick podcast because for me, it's a significant day. It's a quarter of a century. It feels like a lifetime ago. It feels like I've lived multiple lives, but I wanted to do this more for me than anyone else. And if anyone listens to it, it's more of a journal entry. So thanks for tuning in, and I won't make this a habit of doing these, what do we want to call them, special edition podcasts too often. So thanks for listening, and we'll leave it there.